Welcome to the We Talk Health Podcast, the official podcast for West Tennessee Healthcare. Please be advised that this podcast is not intended to replace any medical advice. Always follow your medical professional's advice and direction. Nothing said in this podcast is intended to supersede or supplement the direction of your medical caretakers. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at wetalkhealthpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our best to answer any questions you may have.
Welcome to another episode of We Talk Health. My name is Kwasigroh, and today we are going to be talking about a father's grief and differences of how men and women grieve. Today joining me is LeighAnn Sutton, who's the perinatal bereavement social worker for West Tennessee Healthcare. Matt Dunagan, he's the Milan Middle School history teacher and the Antioch Baptist Church student minister, and he is the father of Will Dunagan. And we also have Eddie Nichols, who is the media specialist too, or one of the media specialists too, for West Tennessee Healthcare, and is the father of Devin Nichols. Everyone, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad we can talk about this. I know I mentioned earlier that we're going to be talking about a father's grief, so what exactly does that mean?
Well, we as a society focus more on a woman and their grief after the death of a child. So what we want to talk about today is how important it is to recognize and acknowledge the fathers who are grieving and ways to support them, but also understand how different their grief could be than a woman's grief. Although mothers and fathers may grieve the death of their child differently, they have the same emotions. Their hearts are crumpled, they may be mangled with all types of emotions, and we need, as a society, to normalize this. So our focus today during this podcast is to learn more about how fathers grieve and ways that we can support grieving fathers. All too often, we forget the father, and we have heard time and time again stories from families where the mother was focused on throughout the labor process and after delivery, and we focused on her physical pain and her emotional pain. But we hear from fathers that say we had no support for them. And so we want to change that. We want to make it just a normal process that we acknowledge the father's pain and grief, and that we also find ways to support them. So today, talking to two fathers who have had beautiful stories after the loss of their child, we want to let them help us understand what they went through and how we can learn from their grief. So I want to give them a time to introduce themselves. So if you will just kind of tell us briefly a little bit about why you're here and why this is important to you.
My name is Matt Dunagan. I'm the student minister at Antioch Baptist Church, and I teach middle school history in Milan. I have two kids right now, Sam and Evie Kate. In 2015, my wife, Mary Beth, we got some unexpected news about our son, Will, that led to some pregnancy complications, and after Will's birth, he lived about 15 hours. Okay. And so after that, Mary Beth, there was really not any support at West Tennessee Healthcare yet, but since then, they've come leaps and bounds. But the father still, there was nothing for me. I was very lucky that I had two fathers who had, lucky for me, but unfortunate for them, they had lost children, and they reached out to me, and that was the only support I had.
Wow.
It was two fathers that I knew beforehand who had lost children. As soon as something went wrong, they had reached out to me on social media, but that was really, it was lacking there, and so
exactly.
I just want to bring awareness because the grief is the same. It's just manifested different ways.
And so how many years has it been since Will's death?
Will died in August of 2015, so it'll be 5 years this August.
Okay. That's a monumental mark, too, the 5-year mark. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So, Eddie, introduce yourself.
Okay, I am Eddie Nichols, and as you said earlier, I'm the father of Devin Nichols. I, too, have two children now. I have a 24-year-old who is Evie Nichols. She's now Evie Grant. She's married. I have a son that's 17. His name is Landon Nichols. And, of course, I work here at West Tennessee Healthcare. And men, we do not have a lot of support in that area. I've been sitting here thinking as he was talking, and I really didn't talk to a lot of people. So it was things I kind of dealt with internally and talked to myself about it a lot and just kind of went through the thought over and over. So the fact that, you all are talking about having support for men, that's a very big thing to really help us be able to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And know that it's, it's normal to grieve and to feel all those different emotions and perhaps help some other men understand how to deal with it better. I think we talked about it some in you can let me know if I go into it too far, because lack of being able to express those emotions or deal with them properly can affect so many different types of relationships. Your relationship with your spouse, it can affect that. Your relationship with your children that you have, because it can come out in so many different ways, depending on how well you deal with that emotion or that feeling of sadness or anger or bitterness or whichever way it go.
I would love to dive right into that whole kind of general understanding of what grief looks like. And so both of you kind of described to me some of the emotions that you felt, not only when you first realized that there were some complications in the pregnancy, but also as you moved forward into the time of delivery and the time of birth for your child.
For me, it was really weird because grief at the beginning didn't manifest like you would think grief did.
Okay.
My wife, her family, my family were both very upset and devastated over the news, and I was, I think I said the other day, I told my wife I was annoyingly optimistic the entire pregnancy. I just knew that everything was going to be okay. My faith played a big part in that, but as the time got near, after Will was born, in probably a couple-week period, we both were grieving simultaneously. Then after that, it kind of switched. As my grief, I faded from optimism into grief. She was fading from grief back into optimism and getting over it. And the only way that we got through it is because we were on that dichotomy of our griefs were completely opposites.
Right. And that's very normal. That's very typical from what we hear from families, is that at one point in the journey of grief, one of the members in that relationship are completely understanding of what's about to happen and talking about it and understanding how to deal with it. And then the other partner is still clinging on to hope, which we all need hope. And so it's perfectly normal to have hope in situations like this, because as a spiritual person, that's what we hang on to. That's what we cling to in the moments of despair and grief. And so that's a very normal reaction, to have two completely different types of reactions to that news and that moment of grief. So Eddie, for you, what kind of things did you experience?
Well, of course, when we found out we were pregnant again, you start to have all the thoughts about, okay, so where I had one kid, I'm seeing two kids running around. You start to have all those future thoughts of what your family is going to look like, all the things that you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then when you get to a place where you have the devastating news that this perhaps might be compromised, it's a whole different flood of emotions, because it's almost like somebody come and just try to just wipe out all the thoughts that you had about what your family dynamics is going to look like, and the joy that comes from that,
I think what you just said, it makes a lot more sense to me and mine, because, when you say that, the first part, when you find out you're having a child, your wife's pregnant, is it, okay, what is my new normal going to be like when that child gets here? And so over a period of time, you finally realize this is what my new normal is. Okay, this is what I think it's going to look like. And then when you lose that child, that idea, that idolization that you had in your head is now taken away. So it's almost like you're having to grieve not only the loss of your child, but the loss of what you think is going to happen in your plans
the
for
loss
the
of your future.
Yeah.
So I think that was really good.
That was a great point.
Yeah. And so you move and you're trying to deal with that. And of course, my wife, she's normally a pretty strong person. We talk about everything, but this was one of the first times that I saw her in a place that I didn't recognize.
Yeah, it wasn't normal for you to think of her in this way.
Yeah, it wasn't normal, and no matter which way I would spin it in my mind, I couldn't get it to a place where it fit, or I had some type of way to console her,
right,
or maybe share with her. So that was a real difficult place. And from there, after getting past that emotion and looking at your future threat that you built up in your mind, like we were talking about, I moved to the place where my concern shifts from not just looking like the future is going to be compromised, having another child and all those other things, but I start to be concerned about my wife. So I'm concerned about the baby. I'm concerned about my wife's health, her mental status. Okay, I even had thoughts, okay, so what if something crazy happened and I lose both of them?
Right.
You know, so you have
That's a real fear.
Yeah, you have all those different things going on, and then you're trying to talk to yourself and convince yourself, okay, Eddie, get yourself together. This is what's happening. It haven't got to that point yet, so let's not add anything extra for you to worry about.
Yeah.
So
What you're describing to me sounds like a lot of anxiety and anxious fear.
yes,
And fear of the unknown is something that I hear that resonates with every family I talk to. You know, not knowing what it's going to look like when the baby actually arrives, and not knowing what to expect, and not knowing how your wife is going to handle that.
Right.
Not knowing how you're going to handle that. And so all of those things just represent to me just that anxiety of fear. And
Yes.
that's an overwhelming sense of emotion that you experience, it sounds like.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, very much so.
I'm going to throw out some words. Just tell me if any of you felt this emotion at any point in time during your journey. What about anger?
I'm not sure if I felt anger or not.
Can you describe why?
Well, so much of it, again, as you made mention earlier about our spirituality.
Yeah.
My spirituality and relationship had a lot to do with how I processed what was happening, because I'm fully aware that things can happen that I don't have control over.
Right.
So I don't think I experienced so much as anger as it was overwhelming disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would have to say almost it was more overwhelming disappointment, or I guess the best way to describe it, it wasn't anger, but there was like mass confusion.
Chaos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mass confusion or chaos, because I didn't know why, or I didn't understand why perhaps it was happening. And then talking to the doctors, they really didn't have an explanation. They just said, this is something that just happens sometime, and we don't have an answer. We don't have a cause. We've seen it, and it just happens.
And it brings no comfort to you at
Yeah,
all, honestly.
Absolutely none.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
I don't know how much help Eddie and I are going to be together, because we're pretty much the same person. So
You have the same mindset.
yeah, because like when I didn't experience anger, because at
Okay.
the point I didn't know who to be angry at. You know, my wife didn't do anything. The doctors didn't do anything. The only
Right.
person I could be angry at is God. But my relationship with Jesus shows me that God is in control, and God has given me so much that there's nothing. Why am I going to be angry at somebody who's given me so much? He's
Yeah.
the one that gives, and He's the one that takes away. But I think the confusion of, God, why did you allow this to happen? Why is all this going
Right.
on? And not sure, you know, my pastor always says it's okay to ask God why, but you don't stay there. You eventually have to move past the why into understanding. And so I think
Good point.
confusion and disappointment would be the two things that I would have to say, the most
Okay.
overriding emotions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking about the differences in maybe how you processed the news and the time of delivery of your children, did you experience any type of people judging you because you weren't grieving the way they expected or anticipated you might?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because it was coming from my family and my wife's family.
Yeah.
And my wife, just to be honest, because like I said, I was annoyingly optimistic. And so my entire family, like even people on our periphery who are not immediate family, or even not blood but family, people outside of that, were looking at us. And Mary Beth's grieving. She's the grieving mother. She's upset. She's heartbroken. She's all these things. And I'm here smiling because I'm in a good mood. I've had a good day, and it's breaking her down. And people are looking at us, and some people have said, well, Matt, have questioned later, well, maybe Matt didn't care. Or,
Oh, wow.
and that kind of thing. And I'm like, no, I even still experience that. We talked the other day about, I don't go to the graveyard unless I'm almost forced to.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's like, Matt, please go to me. You don't go for Will, go for me. Just because of my belief sets, my son's in heaven and he's not at the gravesite, so I don't want to go there. I don't have the want to.
Doesn't have the same meaning.
Right,
attached
it's
to
not.
it.
There's nothing. It's just a place where my son's body was buried. It's nothing else. And my family and her family, and my wife understands that, but she's having now to defend me to her family because they won't come to me and say it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, people misunderstand because grief manifests in different ways for different people.
Exactly.
And it's just, I think we talked about how you and your wife didn't want to go to the gravesite.
Right.
But
right.
I don't want to go, but my wife wants to go. And so even inside that couple, you're going to have two different responses to
Exactly.
different things.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
Do you recognize in yourselves the need to fix the situation or maybe protect your wife from what she's about to experience. Do you recognize that in your journey?
Yes, I would say I recognized it, but again, I think as I shared with you all, my relationship with the Lord just kind of gave me a different perspective, because normally as husbands, we're fixers. If you talk to us and share something, or we see something's happened with you, we want to fix it. But mine was just to the place where I recognized, because of my relationship with the Lord, that this was something that I could not fix.
Right.
There was not enough sorry I could say, or, things that I could do, or expressions of love that I could give out that would fix that. It was going to have to be something that would take a lot of time, and it was something she would have to process and recover from within herself. The best that I could do was be patient and listen when she wanted to talk. If she wanted to cry, I would sit there and let her cry and be there and hold her. Sometimes, she would tell me, just my voice comforted her just when she needed, or she'd say, hold me, or whatever it was. And I would just talk to her and tell her, look, we're going to be okay. So it wasn't so much as what I was saying as it was my voice.
Right. And the actions behind that.
Yeah,
too.
and actions behind that. So, yeah, and that's the bigger part, because I recognize within myself, this is my first time ever going through something like that. So I didn't know what to say, or didn't know what to do. So if you don't have any direction for that, what do you say? What do you do?
Right. You're at a loss.
Yeah.
Complete loss. Yeah. So thinking about men who might be different than both of you, when you're talking a lot about your spirituality and how that grounded you and gave you some guidance and direction, but think about someone who doesn't have that same type of spiritual foundation. What do you think that men typically do with their pain?
They internalize it without a doubt. They turn it in, and then they start. They just really, they withdraw. That's the guy's first thing is anything, because being a guy, your first thing is you got to be strong. You got to show no weaknesses on the outside and no vulnerabilities. So they internalize everything and turn it in, and they act all stoic when they're probably going to pieces on the inside.
Yeah. So how would you suggest that a mom in this situation be able to recognize that all of those feelings for her partner are beginning to be internalized, and they're not talking, they're not showing their emotion, they're not willing to share? So what could a mom do in that situation to help bring their partner into more of maybe even a more outward expression of their grief? Because you mentioned before that talking may not be the key.
Right. I think that a lot of times as husband and wife, we feel like we have to fix everything and go back to it. And the thing is that a lot of times it's going to be outside the relationship, because my wife is not, my wife is everything to me, but my wife does not, is also, she grieves differently. So she doesn't understand. So sometimes it's got to be somebody outside. And we've talked about how that guys make connections through experiences. And so a lot of the times it's going to be that outside experience with somebody else, another guy that's typical.
Okay.
And you build those relationships and that bond and that kinship between the two, and then it can open up from there.
Okay.
Yeah. And another part, I think, with the wives or the person that the man is in a relationship with, for the woman, and I know this may be a hard part because a big majority or a big percentage of the woman is emotional.
Right. That's what we're made of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would really take a great balance to approach the man or approach the husband, keeping a good balance with those emotions, because when the emotions come out too much, when they're trying to talk to us, we don't receive it the same way that they mean
That
it.
their intention is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So reaction to them showing that emotion or trying to express their emotion to you might actually make you retreat a little bit more.
Retreat and withdraw sometimes.
Because if your wife comes to you and you start sharing, if there's one of those times when you're actually going to be vulnerable and share, and then she starts to cry and get upset, you're going to be like, okay, hold up. Maybe I need to. I'd rather internalize it myself and not let my wife know and be upset
than to see her cry.
I'm going to protect her above all else. So I'd rather her not have to deal with my grief too. She can deal with her own grief and I can help her, but she doesn't need to have to help me deal with my grief.
Right.
That's a very powerful statement that, you would much rather take all your own emotions and put them to the side than to actually put them on your wife or your partner and see them suffer through it as well. That's a very powerful thing for a woman to recognize and to understand, because we're naturally going to think, talk. If we talk about it, it gets it out. But for a man, it sounds like there may be something different that you need. And so if it's not talking, that connection with someone else who may have experienced the same thing could help to bring you into maybe acknowledging it more. But is there ever a time when you do feel like talking is beneficial, or is it just having the experience of being with someone that has been through this that matters the most? What's your opinion?
I think that we do have those moments where talking is beneficial for us.
Okay.
But and you tell me what you think, Matt, you can't plan them out.
No,
You can't plan them out, or you can't, push so far up the calendar to say, okay, well, maybe later we can talk here, because those moments really just have to genuinely happen.
I was going to say something very similar, because it's for guys, it's not going to, women are going to sit down. All right, let's talk this out. Let's talk through our emotions. And it's going to be however long it's going to take.
How long it takes.
Forever. For a guy, it's going to be something that's got to be organic, and it's going to take time, and it might not all come out at once. It might be you're golfing with a buddy that's gone through this, and you just, you're talking and something sets, and you just kind of share something. This is how I'm feeling right now, or whatever. And they said, hey man, if you need something, let me know. And it's that moment right there that okay, I've got somebody that, and they know how I'm feeling, and they know my vulnerability right now. They haven't rejected me; they've actually accepted me, and now I can talk to them.
Right.
And it might be piece by piece, sentence by sentence, or thought by thought. You talk to that person.
Okay.
It's not going to be a sit down. Okay, this is what I'm feeling. Can you help me digest it? It's going to be a slow process.
Right. And I think that's something that's very important for women to understand when they're looking at someone in their life that's grieving, a man that's grieving, because our natural tendency is to say, well, let's go to a support group, or let's sit down and let's just talk this out, or maybe let's even go to counseling. I know that's a kind of a taboo subject for men, especially when you're talking about wanting to put your feelings out there in a planned way in that sense. But having something that you mentioned, organic and just spontaneous, and just having that relationship with someone build slowly over time that you feel a connection to, that's very important for a woman to realize. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That's very important.
I think guys bond through experience.
Yes.
Women almost bond through sharing with each other. And so it's a different, men and women's genetic makeup and God created us completely different. And so it's just a kind of understanding and knowing. My wife needs a little bit to talk this out. So if I need to talk to her, I can talk to her about it. And then she needs to understand that if I need to, I'm going to bond through experience and through, and those events are going to be in my mind as rather than just we sat down and talked about it.
Mm-hmm. Good point. So let me fast forward a little bit to kind of what our focus in this program is as we've really built this around mom's grief. Our focus has always been to provide them opportunities to make positive memories, to keep focusing on things that bring joy to your life, and to focus on those types of things instead of focusing on the fact that you lost a child. And so that's where we've always taken our focus with women. But it sounds like our focus with men's grief might be a little bit different. So from a man's perspective, how do you recognize in your own self that you're beginning to heal, that you're beginning to show signs of coming out of that side of grief, and maybe learning how to really cope with it?
Good question.
I threw that one in, and no one was prepared for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah.
So the basic question is, how do you know when healing is beginning for a man? Are there things that you learn how to do in normal everyday life to integrate your grief into everyday activities that you feel like, okay, this is the beginning for me. I'm beginning to see all the colors of the world again. I'm beginning to see hope again.
I don't think for me there was any one moment.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking.
I think it was just a slow
same thing.
One day everything was, and this sounds weird, everything was better. You just kind of get there, and it's slowly, it's almost like a gradual process Well, like when you're outside at sunset and it's nearing sunset and eventually it's getting darker and darker and darker and darker. And then at some point you get, okay, well, it just darkened up a whole lot in a very short amount of time.
Right.
Okay. And that's when it's kind of like that. You kind of gradually get better and then suddenly you're going to make this huge leap and you're like, something that bothered me a month ago didn't bother me today. And so I don't think there's any one moment or any one thing. And I didn't even realize it until, I got to that point where, wow.
Yeah, this is.
It was just a realization one day that, okay, I am doing better. It wasn't, I didn't even realize I was getting better until it was over.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that's because, I've noticed this with women, they will talk continuously. They're consistent about it, about their grieving and bonding and talking to other women. So they have many different moments of sharing and I guess releasing those emotions.
That build up.
Yeah. And with guys, we don't. If I was to ask Matt how many different moments that he had that were just like that moment where you share, you could probably count them all on a couple of fingers. But
that's about right.
It's like when we do have that moment where we can just kind of release and talk about it with someone else. And I mind you that even those moments, it'll look totally different from what a woman experiences.
Right.
The emotional part may not be there, but the inward thinking and making the connections and the process, yes.
It's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah.
And like he was saying, I think we don't have a gauge to say when we're getting better as much as it is as reflecting back on that specific experience that really just gave us clarity, if that makes sense.
Because women talk about it all the time, and they're more open to sharing their emotions, and guys is more like in chunks. And so guys, we just don't deal with it on an everyday basis. I'm concerned with my daughter, my son, my wife. I'm concerned with my work at school, my work at church, and so my focus is hardly ever on me and my well-being and my whatever's going on inside of me. And so that's why there's a lot of times you don't know when. Women talk about it, and they're better at talking and expressing their emotions than men are. They can kind of catalog and track as they get better.
Right.
But guys, since we do it in such chunks, it's like I don't see my students between May and August and some of them shoot up half a foot.
Right.
I don't see that growth. I just see, okay,
you see
wow.
The product
yeah,
of
I see
that.
the product of it, and I don't see my growth is I'm getting over my grief. I see, okay, the product of I've gotten over my grief.
Right.
I don't ever see I'm getting over my grief. The only thing I ever saw was, okay, I've now completely gotten over, or not completely gotten over, but I've gotten over most of it.
You've processed it.
Right.
Well, to wrap all this up, I really wanted to give you a time to just, if you could speak to a man who might be listening to this, or if you could speak to a woman who is in a relationship with someone who has experienced this devastating trauma in their life, the loss of a child, what can you say to that person to say, I recommend you do this. This is something that helped me, or this is something that I feel like you could benefit from. Is there one thing that you could suggest?
Well, one part I would say is this. We've been taught as men, don't cry, don't release your emotions, don't be this way, don't be that way. I would encourage any man to be able to outwardly express your feelings, your emotions, and get it out and not hold it in, because that's not what defines you as a man.
Right.
And the reason we hold things in is because we've been taught that if you do this or you do that, you're not being manly. And that's not true. I share that out of the content of learning from my relationship with God, that I'm more of a man because I can express myself. I can show compassion. I can even release what I'm feeling on the inside and not be ashamed of that.
Right.
And I say that from a point of being able to heal and not being in a place where you kind of
self-destruct.
Yes, self-destruct. That's perfect word. That's what I'm looking for. Self-destruct, because you don't know you're self-destructing
Until it's too late.
until it's too late, or
Right.
until it happens.
Right.
Or you don't know what road you're taking your family or your relationship or your children down until you get to that place. And usually at that point, it's far enough along where do you have even what it takes on the inside to recover?
Right.
So,
To turn yourself around
Yeah.
and to make better out of the situation.
Yeah.
I see where you're going with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if he spoke to the men, I think if I was going to speak to the women, I would say that, you need to validate that what your husband is feeling is okay, but you
Right.
don't need to push the situation.
yes.
I think we talked the other day when we had our pre-meeting that sometimes women ask, well, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And then the man says, well, this is how I'm feeling. And then the women want to unpack everything right then and there.
Okay.
And the husband just wants you to acknowledge, okay, I understand your feeling. Maybe I need to leave you alone and let you process.
Mm-hmm.
Or, hey, go get out of the house, do something. Because, guys, we unpack a lot of things through experiences rather than talking and then building that bond with somebody else. And so that's, that was the one thing is don't push the issue, because if you're going to push them, all they're just going to do is they're going to be like, never mind, I don't want to worry you, I don't want to bother you. They're going to internalize it even more rather than validate, okay, I'm sorry that you're, I know you're hurting.
You're
I'm
hurting
sorry.
too.
Is there anything that I can do? And then if there is genuinely something to do, I know for me, I'll tell my wife, yeah, you can, just give me a few minutes, I'll be okay. Rather than, well, let's talk about it. Why are you feeling like this? Can you do this? Can you do that?
Because at that moment, you really don't know why you're feeling that way. You just
know,
feel
you
it.
just know this is how I'm feeling, and I'm trying. Like Eddie has said, men do not process our emotions very well, and a lot of times we don't really know why we're feeling something till we have time to unpack it ourselves. So when you say, well, what's wrong with you? Well, this is how I'm feeling. Well, why are you feeling that? I really have no earthly idea why I'm feeling like this. And so it's just a lot to try to unpack that by ourselves and in the moment right now.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate both of you being open and honest and willing to share. It takes a lot to do that. I know just from listening to your stories, it sounds like you have come a long way, but I can only imagine what it was like in those moments. So I appreciate you being willing to go back to those places with me and share, and hopefully make the journey a little bit easier or a little bit more normal for other men who might be feeling this way too. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you for
us.
having us.
This has been another episode of We Talk Health, and I wish you a happy Father's Day.